I'm Adrian Owen, a partner of Montagu and a part of our interaction with our clients. We have been doing some podcasts during our virtual meetings with clients, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Graham Craig, who is the Commercial Development Director of TFL, and to chat about how things have been going with TFL in relation, obviously, their recent 20th anniversary. And Graham, I think you've been at TFL since 2004, so it'd be good to perhaps have a bit of background in terms of your role and career.
Yeah, sure. So I joined TFL 2004 originally to run the congestion charging scheme. Was working for a number of years in a variety of transport roles within TFL. Then in 2012, with no prior experience in this industry, I found myself running TFL's commercial development function, which included 5,500 acres of land, 1.5% of London's land mass. And though I was approaching this role initially with a degree of some trepidation, I discovered I'd stumbled upon one of the more interesting jobs in London with huge potential, some of which we've sought to bring forward over the course of the last 8 years. And we have transformed the approach that we've taken, but there's much, much more still yet to be done.
And what would you say were the sort of the key objective, in terms of your role and the property side of TFL?
Initially, I guess it was just to find out what in practice we actually owned. Just be clear about what we owned, have a strategy, recognise the fact that if you own 5,500 acres of land in London, whether you accept it or not, you are a property company. And for a very, very long time, TFL had seen itself as solely as a transport organisation. And of course, that's no way to maximise the benefits of the land holdings that you've got. So in terms of just understanding what we owned, the value of those assets, how in practice we might take them forward. Critically also to recruit the people who we needed. I mean, we had some great people back in 2012, but not enough. So I know TFL was also an organisation that, let's be honest, no one in this space would have wanted to move into, or few people, I should say, would have wanted to move into. So actually being in a position to attract, retain, motivate, develop the team that we've got, that was a major undertaking. And I'm pleased to say we're now at the point where we've got not only a very capable, commercially experienced senior management team, we're now at the point where we've actually got layers of competent people, more diverse at a junior level. We still have a lot more to do to bring that diversity through to a senior level, but I'm very, very confident of the team that we've managed to build up over the years. And they, of course, are critical. The team, along with the strategy, along with the governance. So again, at the point when we started, there really wasn't anyone at a senior level in the organisation to whom we could actually sit down and talk about what is the right strategy, how in practice do we make the best use of the land holdings we've got. So working initially with Francis Salway and then putting in place a completely new structure with experienced non-executive directors has played such a big part over the course of the last 4 or 5 years in enabling us to have a commercial strategy, but one that also delivers massive social benefits to the organisation and indeed the wider city.
And what, talking of that team, and what sort of scale is that team? I mean, how many people do you have working within your business?
Within my team at the moment, we have 320, and that's split fairly evenly between an estates management function that manages TFL's operational property assets. So that's the head office buildings, the depots. It includes the team responsible for facilities operations, the compulsory purchase team. So that's half of my team is effectively estates management. The other half of the team is the commercial property function, and that covers, as you would expect, property development, asset management, property management. And it's as I say, these days very competent, experienced commercial team where we've got the people who've got really significant domain knowledge in their in the areas in which they are working.
And that must help a lot, actually, which leads me to my next question in relation to kind of looking back over the last 20 years. And I know that you didn't have the team in place necessarily for all that time, but certainly within the TFL anniversary piece and in relation to that, sort of what property-related challenges do you feel have been the most notable? Whether that's a move from the ad hoc disposals to a more strategic income-generating view, or the complexities of TFL and the housing delivery piece, or the significant growth of the team that we've just talked about.
All of the above, but also probably above all, it's just that getting TFL to recognise that we are a property company, getting TFL's engineers, including those within London Underground, to recognise that actually if we take forward commercial activity, development activity on the transport network, then that not only builds the homes, the jobs, the growth that London needs, but also creates income that we can reinvest in the transport network, and changing that mindset, sometimes literally an engineer at a time, so that they go from thinking, how do I protect the railway, into how do I take all the unique knowledge that I've got to help to unlock development. And that's one of the things that we can really bring to partnerships these days. One of the largest, certainly one of the most experienced and capable engineering functions anywhere on the planet, and saying, well, how do we use all of that experience, all of that knowledge in order to help to unlock development? It's brilliant that we've got to that point, but it wasn't, if I'm honest, entirely straightforward, the process. But that really is just symptomatic of what we've gone through. We've got TFL to recognise that we are a major property company in London. We brought together all of the commercial assets that we own in one place. So we've got £1.7 billion worth of commercial property assets located in one company within TFL. And for myself and the team that run that company, well, our job really is quite straightforward. It is, how do you leverage those assets to create the ongoing income, the increase in values? How do we deliver not just our straightforward commercial objectives, but more broadly understand how we can make improvements to the transport network? How can we represent the best of what this city needs to be on the back of the assets that we've got? And again, it wasn't, well, it was understood 100 years ago, the inextricable link between transport and development. We understood that at the time of Metroland. It's understood still in many other parts of the world. But it's a lesson that for some reason we seem to continue to have to relearn in this country. I'm very confident of the team that we've built up within TFL, as are more confident that we've now got the structures in place that mean that the next 10, the next 20 years, we'll see an enormous transformation on the back of the land holdings that we've got, as we increasingly take a professional, ambitious view as to how we bring those forward.
And no doubt that that your length of time and service in terms of and knowledge of how TFL operates, since 2004, and the roles that you've played within that, have no doubt make it a lot easier in terms of those challenges that you refer to. And a nice segue from you in terms to the next 20 years, in terms of what you might think are the greatest opportunities for TFL property, and some of the conversations that we've had in terms of the proper propco set up and where that goes, and also the further opportunities around the major infrastructure projects that kind of again neatly tie back into the operational side of the transport network too. What do you feel those greatest opportunities are for TFL property looking forward over the next 20 years?
I think, well, let me just begin by what the starting point is. So the starting point is we have a wholly self-financed business plan. So the £1.1 billion of investment to unlock our first 13,000 homes on our land, all of that is secured on the back of the assets that we own. And our plans, whether that's disposing of assets to reinvest elsewhere, or recycling land value and developers' profit. We have, for the first time, a business plan that unlocks, in this case, 13,000 homes, but with no need to divert any investment from TFL's core transport operation into what we're doing from a property development point of view. So we do that, and over the course of those 10 years, we will see, as it happens, an 8% compound annual growth rate in terms of the income that we produce. So effectively, over the 10 years, we double the income that we get from our assets, from £100 million a year to 200, and all of that money is reinvested back on the transport network. So that's the starting point. We think in practice, or we know in practice, we can bring forward tens of thousands of homes on TFL land. And if then you've got an organisation capable of bringing forward that scale of activity, if that's within a transport organisation that's able to think strategically, creatively about the interplay between development and transport, that's a great position for TFL to be in, not simply in terms of how can we use development in order to fund and deliver transport improvements, and that could be new interchanges or step-free access, or helping support the electrification of the bus network. Potentially it then expands in the future to new stations or extensions of lines. But it's also, for me, about how we can address some of those systemic issues that the industry faces. What it is that we can do to address things like diversity. It simply isn't sustainable that we're in the most diverse city in the world, and yet the people who are responsible for property look, I'm ashamed to say, too much like you and me, Adrian. Ultimately, we need to be in a position in which the people who are creating this city, managing the property in this city, represent what the city looks like and sounds like and thinks like. And if you're bringing forward literally thousands of homes for literally decades to come, then you've got the ability to think about how you can attract, develop, promote the people that better represent London. And that, for me, is just one example of what we can do on the back of our programme. The ability to take that long-term view, to engage in counter-cyclical investment, because again, given the scale of the assets we've got, TFL is in a position to not be thinking about our portfolio on a site-by-site basis, but think about it as a single portfolio. How do we take that forward year after year after year? And how then do we leverage that in order to help support, whether it's modern methods of construction or investment in diversity, or even just bringing forward sufficient people with the skills that we need in order to construct the London of the future.
And these kind of estates, actually, the reality, I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's a huge amount the industry can do, and I'll come on to a question about the industry in a minute, in terms of diversity. I think large landowners have a huge part to play, as you've articulated really well, in terms of whether that be through the construction and delivery of some of those buildings and assets, and how that plays into diversity within that supply chain. But what fascinates me is the fact that actually there are a lot of similarities with some larger private estates in the way that they are set up to in a different model, but actually the income generation that supports in some instances those old, many old generation families, whatever it might be. But the ability to be able to take, I'm sure, some lessons from private sector and deliver that into the public sector is a really tricky task. But actually, the other part of that development and an income cycle is the fact that it actually doesn't sit in a fiscal cycle. Development never sits in a fiscal cycle, and the ability to be able to have that longer term view then presumably allows you to obviously get a lot more out of those assets and be patient in terms of riding over any economic cycles that may create some bumps in the road for the private sector.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think it's the ability to, much as anything, just think in an agile way. In recent weeks, at its worst, it sometimes sounds as if people are suggesting that other people ought to change their habits to fit in with buildings, rather than actually thinking about how do buildings adapt in order to meet the needs that people have in this world. And COVID-19 hasn't, well, all COVID-19 has done is bring forward what we all knew was going to happen, and how we as an industry respond to that is, I think, deeply important in terms of shaping the next 5, 10, 20 years.
I completely agree, and without going down a rabbit hole, the reality of what that looks like from a design metric from local authorities as well, in terms of requirements for more public communities and outside space, area, not so many rabbit hutches in terms of accommodation and living, but equally the IT infrastructure that gets put into buildings, which perhaps are an afterthought in terms of the requirement to be able to have proper IT structures that and support systems that allow for the virtual working that we've been through. Final question really from me, and I really appreciate your time today, Graham, but how can the property industry do better in helping you? If you had a top criteria that you'd look for in a development partner, for example, what are your thoughts around that as a conclusion?
Adrian, you and I know each other well enough that I'm never going to be able to come up with a single criteria. What I would say is that we'll continue to work with SMEs. 86% of our tenants are SMEs. I think that's a real strength for us. Again, what's been interesting over the last few months is that whilst high street brands have shut down, it's the SMEs have been the ones who've been imaginative, understanding how they might allow their business to change in order to continue to meet their customers' demands, continue to employ their staff. It's been superb to see on our estate and elsewhere the way that SMEs have responded to the challenges over the course of the last few months. So I'm resolutely of the view that our estate, which is largely SMEs, is something that's a strength for us. I also think that a lot of people might have spent the last few months rethinking what they want to do with their lives, and TFL is in a great position to offer those people not just the space, but the support that they need. We'll continue to work with small builders and others on our small sites program. I think that's an important part in which we can work with the industry. But I think across the bulk of our activity, the major development sites, for me, it's a TFL working with a smaller number of partners and a deeper relationship, one that isn't a sort of individual project by project procurement, but increasingly thinking, well, actually, who it is that we can have a strategic relationship with, who understands what it is that we're trying to achieve in terms of development, of diversity, about how we can make more use of AI, modern methods of construction in order to bring forward the scale of activity that we want. If we are talking, and we are, about developing literally dozens of sites to bring forward tens of thousands of homes, you don't do that on an individual site-by-site basis. What you have is a close relationship with a small number of organisations, and between us, we understand how in practice we bring forward the change that can transform this city, to put in place the new town centres that will reflect the reality of a post-COVID world in which how people work, how they live, how they enjoy themselves close to their home will be utterly different from the way things were in the past. Central London will always have a role, but someone like me, I'm expecting to spend my life a third of the time at home, a third of the time in the office, and a third of the time out on site. And I think that's increasingly going to be a model and a way of working that people across London will do. And if that is the case, then TFL, other major landowners, are going to have to think about how we utilise our estate, how we develop it, in order to support, in order to enhance those ways of working.
Yeah, and I think your advisors, the industry, your partners, and that deeper relationship and that you get with them is aligning and properly understanding the portfolio objective over a longer time scale, rather than it being purely, as you say, on an individual basis. And certainly we enjoy working with you in that context as well. thank you for your time today. I know you're a busy man, but we really appreciate your time on the Montagu podcast today. Thank you very much, Graham Craig, Commercial Development
No
Director
problem.
at TFL.